Hi everyone. I'm going to send along this weekly update. There will be another one that follows fairly shortly after this, but I couldn't fit everything into just one video this time. So I want to start by talking about some recent online discussions and assignments. So in this video I'm going to talk about the CRAP test discussion board that you completed and the evaluating relevance assignment. So the CRAP discussion asked you to use the CRAP test, which helps you pinpoint specific attributes you should be looking for in online sources when you're evaluating these in terms of their quality. I think this is an extremely important skill set, and it's important not just as a researcher to be able to find good information, but it's really important just as a citizen to be able to decide, what is high quality information and what is not. There was a little bit of difference in some of the opinions, so I just want to highlight a few things in the articles that I think are important to pay attention to and the way that I would have rated these. So, sorry, one of the top rated article would have been this one. Of course, this is a scholarly source, as many of you noted. But a few things to think about in terms of scholarly sources. While they can be a bit more difficult to read, they also are just much more detailed in the information that they provide. You can see already that the authors are researchers who are experts in this, in the fields that the article touches on. And one of the most important things to keep in mind in terms of scholarly sources and how they differ from some other sources is not only do they give you a wealth of background information about what other researchers have found out in this area and tons of other resources that you can follow up with if you want to learn more. They also do something that's really important, which is provide for you the details about how they collected their own data. So most scholarly sources, there is some research that's being done. The authors are collecting their own data, or they're finding their own evidence and describing how that evidence fits into their reasoning. In this case, these individuals performed an experiment. And not only did they perform it, they're going to give you all the information you need to assess whether they did a good job with how they developed that experimental research or not. So it gives you all the tools you need as a reader to determine whether you think this is quality information or not, or to ask good questions about the information and the study itself. And that is one of the key reasons why this information surpasses almost any information you'll get in a popular source. The Pew Research Center is the second best source that I provided. One of the things about the Pew Research Center, one thing is it has, if you were to Google this, you would realize that it is a research center, obviously, with a high reputation for providing quality research. And one of the things you would notice if you took some time to peruse their website is they have a lot of studies that they issue in different reports. And they employ, if you were to scroll down and you were to look at the authors, you would see that this takes you to the other things they have published. And you see they're publishing other research in the same kind of area. So they have some expertise. You could also probably look it up. They employ a number of experts, sometimes professors or researchers as well. So the Pew source, while it is a popular source in that it tends to be written for a more general audience, one of the things that it does different than most popular sources that you would read is also gives you information about how they collected their evidence. Number one is it is a research center, so they are going out and collecting their own evidence and their own research. But more than that, they aren't simply just reporting on it. Maybe in the first page they would just give you a report. But you can see here along the sides that you can dig more deeply into the actual report itself and the information that they provide. So if you were to scroll through this whole article, which I'm not going to do for the sake of time, not only would you see these themes, but they'll give you some specific information about how did they find the information, right, that they found. What did they do to collect this data or evidence? Again, that gives you the tools as a reader that you need to know, well, did they ask the right people? Did they ask the right questions? You know, do I agree with not only with their summary of what they found, but do I agree with, you know, how they collected this? Or can I see that there might be potential issues? So you see here, they let you know they've talked to 1,116 people. You know, that's a little bit of the information. Third would be the American Scientist article, The Persistence and Peril of Misinformation. One of the reasons why I would have chose this as being the third place is that if you do, you know, look up these authors, you'll see that, again, these are researchers in the area, right? These are people who have PhDs in the areas they are studying, they work at universities, and they're well informed on the research process. So, you know, I'd feel a bit more comfortable with their expertise. They aren't simply authors who are giving you their secondhand analysis of a topic, but they're people who study this for a living. One thing that I would say, you know, this article doesn't do that the others do is it doesn't provide you as much information about like background information. It doesn't give you as many sources as the other articles do. It does, however, you know, identify specific research that they are using to form their argument. And it gives you good background knowledge as well. And there's not a lot of links to the specific studies, but there is, however, a list of sources that these authors drew from, a bibliography. And you can look at their bibliography and see that they are using scholarly sources to write about this, right? So you can feel pretty confident in the information that you get here. CBS would be my fourth one. CBS, as we all know, is a pretty common, popular source. The topic seems relevant. If you were to search this author, you would find that, however, that she's not an expert in this field. She is a manager, an editor, a writer, but she's not a researcher. So, you know, she doesn't have the same level of expertise as a number of the authors that we have looked at already. You'll also see that the things that are linked or the resources she's using to write about this are not scholarly sources. They're not scholarly journals. They're not other research. They are maybe some people who should have some knowledge in the area. But, you know, there's a difference between a social media marketer talking to you about why they quit Facebook and a researcher talking about what social media addiction actually is and what it looks like. So that's pretty important difference. At the same time, it is published on CBS, and that means there's an editor. So there is at least someone else looking at this article and making sure that the information they have provided is accurate. And there are a few links to some potential studies as well. The last one, as most of you noted, would be the Natural News. Actually, if you did some research on this source itself, you would find that people really don't consider this to be at all a useful source. In fact, research that's been done on this source has found that there's blatant misinformation that is oftentimes published on this source. And you also just kind of tell, hopefully, from the way it's set up. I mean, it's primarily here to sell you stuff. The title itself doesn't seem to offer any substantial information. There's absolutely, you know, no links that take you to anything other than some other like blog posts, right? So no research, it's just people's ideas about what they think they found out. So there's no links to any official studies. There's no expertise that's being presented in any way. So a source like this should be considered very suspect, right? Alrighty. So in addition to thinking about web sources and how do you evaluate those, you were asked to think about scholarly sources. And here, one of the most important things that you evaluate is the relevance. So you can kind of trust those sources in terms of their quality. They're written by experts, they are citing things, they are collecting their own evidence. But one of the most difficult things is determining, are they relevant for your topic? So one thing that kind of got people off a little bit is I asked them to use this. I asked you to use this specific idea as your research study. So I wanted to assess the relevance in relationship to this. Some of you, I think, assessed the relevance in relation to your own research topic, and that wasn't quite what I was looking for. One of the things you should know is there's lots of different ways to do this. There's no one right answer, but it's important that when you're looking for whether an article is relevant or not, you're drawing on very specific information from the abstract to make that determination. So this one, a lot of people said they would use this, talking to broadcasters on Twitter, networked gatekeeping and Twitter conversations with journalists. So some of the reasons you might use a source like this is because it is talking about, in the green, you'll notice, they're talking about citizens engaging in conversations, right? That is part of what we mean by political engagement, and particularly engaging with their news sources. They also mention here that politically active citizens interacted more often. So that tells you also something about the level of political engagement among those who are at least using Twitter as a resource here. Reasons you might not use this resource is that it's primarily focused on networked gatekeeping. So rather than really identifying, heavily focused on the participants, it's going to give you kind of a production-based view, right? So it's coming from the journalists themselves. And it's talking about this idea of gatekeeping, which is really more about how does the news keep tabs on what information is available to us and what information is not. And so, you know, that might be reasons why you feel it's a little less relevant. Whereas a source like this is pretty solidly about political engagement and social media. So, I mean, it pretty much directly asks, even in the title, social media use for news, so people who are using social media to get news, and how does this influence their civic engagement, their political participation, their social capital. So they tell you right here, one of the key findings is that seeking information via social network sites is positive and significant predictor of people's social capital and civic and political participation behaviors online and offline. So a result like that is pretty directly tied to the idea of, you know, are people who are more actively seeking their materials online also more likely to be politically active, or are they less likely? This tells me some very relevant information in relationship to that. Lastly, I just want to highlight a few others. I'm not going to go through them all because I don't have time in the video, but Twitter as a news source, this was one that a lot of people said they would use. I think a couple important things here. A few people noted that they wouldn't use it because of the context where it takes place. This is obvious looking at Dutch and British tabloids. That's not U.S. newspapers, so you could choose not to use it based on that. I would say sometimes that makes sense for a research project, other times it doesn't. But one of the key things why I think this doesn't really fit very well is that it's really about how journalists are using Twitter to write and report news stories. So it's not really about how people engage or interact or participate in politics via social media or the news they get in an online setting. So it's really important that you pay close attention to, you know, what is this actually about, this article, and does it really fit well with the topic I'm studying?